Welcome back, Wanderer, to the corner of story and game. Today, we're diving back into the lenses from the art of game design, tackling 4 more with our special guest, Philip Balli. As a freelance game writer and narrative designer, Phil brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to the topic, both from his time working at OrionGames and from helping run the narrative department's masterclass. Phil, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Me too, man. Me too. This has taken a while to set up, and I'm glad that we have. And I'm glad that you're here to talk with me today about some of the lenses from the art of game design. That's exciting stuff.
Yes. Yeah. I am a big fan of the show in general. I've come to really love it. I'm just kind of making my way through the back catalog, but I do feel like very excited and honored for having you invite me to speak about the lenses and just sort of be up there with Jessica Slowinski and Barbara Vermel. I feel like I learned so much just from listening to your discussions with them. But yeah, I just wanted to also echo what Jessica said, and thank you for this series of your podcast. I think it's, for anyone interested in game design, this is like a treasure. It's going to become like a treasure trove. And like, I think everyone's going to just be pointing to your podcast, like, oh, listen to this episode or that episode. So yeah, it's very cool.
Thanks, man. That's really sweet. Don't make me cry already. Okay, well, we're going to attack the lens of meaningful choices, the lens of character, the lens of feedback, and for some reason, you chose the lens of documentation. So those are our 4. But before we dig into those, I like to ground things a little bit, give people a peek of who Phil is. So can you tell us how you fell in love with gaming, your journey to get here, and what you're up to these days?
Yeah, for sure. I gave some thought to this, and I feel like I don't give enough thought to like the question of how I stumbled into gaming, because in my head it's just like I've just played them for as long as I can remember. But I really challenged myself to be like, okay, well, actually go back and what was the start? Like, what are those like core memories? And I keep going back to Donkey Kong Country on the SNES. Like those 3 games will always be super special to me. And I still play them on the Switch, emulate the SNES emulator. I have so many memories of I come from a family of 6, and I have 3 siblings, 2 brothers and a sister. And my brother and I, the one that's closer in age with me, we're the ones that kind of like we went all in on gaming, and my sister, my older brother, kind of did other things. But these games were like, I also feel like games that we all played all the time. Like it wasn't just Justin and I. It was me, it was Rebecca, it was Aaron. And we all made like really core and special memories with these 3 games specifically. So that's what I kind of landed on when I thought of what was the thing that really got me into it. And then from there, I didn't play a ton of. I don't have a lot of other memories playing like other SNES games, but I know I did, and I think I got a bulk of my experience using an SNES emulator on my computer, and I think that's sort of how I started dipping my toes into RPGs, like Seventh Saga, some of the early Mana games, and then into Final Fantasy. Specifically for me, Final Fantasy IV. I remember starting many files on that emulator, and I think I eventually beat it on the emulator. But I kept going back in for that one, and I remain a big fan of that franchise today. But I think just Nintendo in general, so SNES, that emulator, Game Boys, getting into Pokemon and some other Donkey Kong games. Those are all like really core memories. And I don't think like the first version of an Xbox I had was an Xbox 360 when I was a little older, and I completely missed the PlayStation 1. I think the only time I ever played on that console is when I would visit a cousin of mine in Corpus, and it was just always like Crash Bandicoot or Spyro, but I don't really have a lot of memories of that. But I did get my exposure to all the amazing PlayStation RPGs, playing them on PlayStation 2, like Chrono Cross and FF7 and 8 and 9. But yeah, really, it boils down to Nintendo, and that was sort of like how I fell in love with video games, and then so now, I mean, I still I play games all the time, when I can. It's a bit harder now to commit to these really long games, but I find a way, in between the work that I do, and I find myself now as a sort of freelance game writer, also doing narrative design work. I feel like young me would not believe that this is the thing that I would be doing right now, because partly, so much of I think this journey starts the same for a lot of people. It's like, I love games, I've always played games, but I never thought this could be like a way to make money, or like a viable career path. But that was something that I learned in my when I was getting my MFA in screenwriting at UT, which is where I met Susan O'Connor, who I'm sure we'll speak about again. I know you've had her on the show. She's the founder and CEO of the narrative department. Just conversations with her, like the connections, those threads of like writing and playing games and writing for games just started to like tie together. So that's where I find myself now, and I've done some work with a fully remote studio called OrionGames for over 2 years. Find myself right now in between things, and I'm helping Susan with a lot of the behind the scenes work with the narrative department, and just looking for that next contract. But yeah.
Look at that. So you went and got your MFA. What were you pursuing games from the start, or was there like something that made you shift path somewhere along the way there? Is there a story there?
Yeah, no, I went straight out of undergrad into working as a journalist, and I did that for about 3 years, and it was not ever something that I aspired to do. It was just at a time like coming out of school, I wanted a job. I knew I didn't want to go right into like any sort of master's program. I didn't even know what I would want to do. So journalism seemed fun, and it was a job where I could write, albeit not the kind of writing I wanted to be doing, but I was writing, which was nice. And I sort of just fell in love with the idea of screenwriting and maybe pursuing that. And I at that point I was a consumer. I was not someone who in my undergrad studied film or anything like that. I was just like someone that loved a good movie or loved a good TV show, and also I love to write. So why not, right? Why couldn't I give this a shot? So yeah, I looked up programs here, just like screenwriting programs, and thankfully I am in Texas, and the school at UT's MFA program in screenwriting is like consistently ranked, pretty high up there. So I was like, okay, I'll try to apply here, and if I get it, then that'll be our impetus to take that next step. Me and my partner at the time, and I think I foolishly thought I could like make this first application cycle, and thought like, oh yeah, I can write a screenplay, like that'll be easy. And I mean, there was the GRE. So I think that was like the year of 2014 when I thought I could make the cycle, but I did not. So I then set a goal of like 2015, that full year, I'm going to work on my pilot. It was a 60-minute pilot, writing sample. I'm going to study and take the GRE and do all the stuff. And then, come the fall, I'm going to apply. So I think when August or September of 2015 rolled around, I applied and was eventually accepted to the program at UT. So in 2016, we moved up there, and that was just the plan. I was just going to pursue this. It was really like a brand new world, just kind of like writing for games was brand new to me like 3 or 4 years ago. So new frontier, fun, really, tons of stuff for me to learn. And I eventually was connected with the opportunity to intern for Noah Hawley who the creator of Fargo, who he splits his time between Austin and LA.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just like another step in that journey, and eventually led me to a job as a writer's assistant on Fargo season 4, which required me to live in LA. So from Austin in 2019, we then moved to LA. Spent about a good 2 years there, and then found our way back. During COVID and lockdown stuff, we found we had a desire to move back home in Laredo, Texas, and have our daughters grow up around family. It was a lot of change all at once. Big new career, new city. We were first time parents, and so yeah, I think we always knew we were gonna come back, but the COVID stuff and lockdown just expedited that decision for us. And since I've been back, I've still kind of had a foot in that industry, and I've been able and fortunate to work in 2 virtual rooms, one for an HBO show and one for an Apple TV show. And so yeah, I mean, I find that the connections that I made while I was there in LA are still paying dividends, and I'm still in touch with these folks, these writers, and I know if they're put in a room together, I at least will be someone they think about. So it's nice to have that option and to be able to do it remotely and not have to uproot, family or anything like that. But yeah, I was for a long time just all in. But as soon as I moved back, it's kind of around the same time Susan got the idea for the narrative department. It wasn't even named that. It was just like, I've got a game writing masterclass. Let's do it. Let's run the first pilot. And I believe that was in 2020 also. So I came here, I did some teaching as an adjunct professor for the university for screenwriting. At the same time, I was taking Susan's class and just having my brain broken in multiple ways about writing for games and how it's so different from screenwriting, and just, not unlearning the screenwriting stuff, but just putting that on pause and allowing myself to take in new information about new ways of writing for interactive fiction. And yeah, so I just slowly started shifting to that. And after I took her class, I just started beginning to use some of those samples that I made to apply for jobs. And it was a long time coming, but I think since finishing her course in 2020, end of 2020, I think I got my job at Orion in November of 2022. Oh, no, in November of 2021. So yeah, it was a long search, but Susan is nothing but supportive, and I got to still to do a lot of independent study on my own and reading a bunch of books on the craft, and just always playing games too, and looking at games that I'm playing with a more critical eye. And yeah, I think all of that just kind of led me to landing that first gig with Orion.
That's so cool. And it's just a start. There's all kinds of crazy stuff ahead of you, I'm sure.
I hope. Yeah.
All right, man. Well, let's dig into the lenses. And we're going to start this thing off with the lens of meaningful choices. So for the people who are listening who are not familiar with all the lenses inside and out, can you briefly explain what is this lens, and then how it influences your work?
Yeah, of course. So this lens encompasses the idea that a good game gives the player meaningful choices that will have real impacts on what happens and how the game turns out. Jesse Schell, in his book, I don't think we've named it yet, but The Art of Game Design, provides an example of both meaningful and meaningless choices, and I find them both really interesting. And I think in the book he said one example of a meaningless choice. I think he talks about how in a first-person shooter, if you're going to be offered 10 guns, all completely different, but one gun is clearly better than the rest, then in that case it's like having no choice at all. You're always going to choose that one. And in reading that, it made me think about, I don't play a ton of shooters competitively, but I did. One of the last ones I really enjoyed was Battlefield 1, and I remember like working my way to unlocking like the best rifle there was, and I think it was called the Martini Henry. And I got that because it was like almost like a guaranteed one-shot kill. You if you can land your shots with that, then you're gonna get that. But so yeah, I was thinking of that, like, well, was that a meaningless choice in that game? Like, or I'll get back to this, or is it a dominant strategy, which is something else Jesse Shell talks about. But yeah, he also talks about dominant strategies, and how when a dominant strategy in a game is discovered by players, playtesters, or whether they be on the team or players themselves, that a game can no longer be fun because there's no more choices to make. You found that dominant strategy, and that's the thing that players are just going to kind of default to because it's the easiest way to go through this game that they've decided. So it's just thinking about this lens and reflecting on my time at OrionGames. We shipped our game Arto May 1st of last year, 2023. So yeah, in a lot of these lenses, I've been thinking about like that experience and what examples I could pull from. So specifically for this, I was thinking about how I was brought onto the team very late in production to overhaul a lot of the dialogue system, which I'll get to. But I was thinking for as an example, just to begin with, the team as a whole decided to overhaul this one system that we had in the game. It's sort of like a magical ranged weapon that we would just call the paint arrow, just in house. And there was like a lot of pitches that were thrown out by everyone, including myself. There was like they're encouraging everyone. It's a pretty small team, but it didn't matter what your discipline was. It was like everyone's always throwing out pitches and ideas. So naturally, a lot of ideas were thrown out, like how to make this system more interesting for players. And I think at a certain point, our creative director and our lead programmer they presented a plan for this sort of mix and match spell creation system that would offer players more than 80 choices or variations of how to use this paint arrow. And so with this system, players could customize the paint arrow, in one of the menus to make it deal like straight damage, or you can make it deal like damage over time with a poison effect. Or you could change like the projectile's path. So like you could have it homing, or you can have it like chaining. So it was it's a really cool system with a lot of depth and space for choice on the part of the players. But I think one of the main issues we faced following the creation of this system was ensuring that all of those choices, there's 80 choices now, making sure they all felt valid and like they belonged in the game. And at this point, there just wasn't time to like design or redesign enemies or encounters within levels, to make all of those choices feel like they were necessitated in certain moments. And so we were kind of left with a system that had a ton of choices, but we had very little motivation within the game itself to invite players to engage with the amount of depth that the system offered. So I think that's like a learning. That was definitely like coming away from it, post-mortem, just thinking of it like that. Like, you don't design the system or overhaul the system way deep into production. You gotta think about the system and also how it's going to be, how we're going to invite players to engage with it. The thought to that is almost as important as designing the system itself, because again, then you have a situation where you have choices that don't feel meaningful. Right. And I think I was thinking of also like what Jesse Shell talks about, like dominant strategies, and it's kind of in his book painted as like a negative. I think I mentioned it, that when a dominant strategy is identified, if there's time in production, it's like, how can we fix this? How can we patch this or make it so that it is not a dominant strategy, or like what's the rock paper scissors of it all, and like figuring out how to kind of nerf it in a way to make just for a more balanced experience. But I think there's an interesting link between dominant strategy, the people who identify dominant strategies, and like the act of speed running in games, which is something I really love. Like here's where I'll bring up Hades. I really love watching Hades speedruns, and even like after I put in 200 hours, I was like, how can I make this experience fresh? And okay, I'll start speedrunning myself. So I started speedrunning and then messing with high heat after that. But I was like obsessed with the speedrun and like just watching people get their in-game time faster and faster, and with every speedrun for any game, there's a bunch of different categories. So I love when speedrunners, not just for Hades but any game, like players playing at like the top tier are able to like identify those kinds of strategies that will allow them to beat a game as fast as possible. And I'm talking specifically about like not speedruns that employ a bunch of glitches or anything like that. I'm talking about like how are these people just like playing at the highest tier possible, and I find that really interesting, and it makes for good content.
And they're still enjoying meaningful choices in that case, but you do have a point where it's a asymmetrical game that involves PvP or competitive nature, and then you have a choice that is obviously more powerful than others, then suddenly the others don't make sense. You've got that golden gun situation where
exactly
the others go away.
Yeah, and I think Hades is an interesting example because it's not the build that you're getting online is not always in your control. Like there's a certain amount of luck and RNG. Am I going to get the epic version of this, or am I just going to get the so it's fun to watch and even experience for yourself when like the perfect build is coming online. You're getting the purples, you're getting the duo boons, you're like, oh, and it's like, oh, now my hands are starting to shake because I've got something going. Now I've got to run on my hands.
Right.
And it's fun to be in that position. It's fun to watch other people be in that position too.
Cool. You mentioned rewriting branching dialogue, I think, to make the choices more meaningful. Your work in Arto. Can you share some of the shortcuts or the tips, the things you learned along the way when you were doing that?
Yes, definitely. This was definitely something I wanted to bring up. Just another sort of post-mortem look at my experience. So Arto provides players with multiple avenues to make meaningful choices. The pain arrow is one example, of a game that, or a system that offers those choices, but it kind of misses the mark, and as to whether they're meaningful. But the game also has a skill tree, so this is a space where players will be able to decide for themselves: do I need more health in this moment? Do I need more magic resources? Should I unlock a new weapon skill or flask charges? Or maybe I should get the double dash, or that way I can get closer to the triple dash. So I think that's a pretty good example. But then there's the branching dialogue system as well. This was in place before I was brought onto the team. Again, I was brought on pretty late, and just inherently, I think a branching dialogue system creates another avenue for players to make meaningful choices, but only if those choices presented to the players are meaningful.
Right.
So that's sort of how my contract at OrionGames started. I was brought on to simply rewrite all of the dialogue that existed in the game, and to provide a clearer sense of like the overall narrative and story, just to make sure it was all cohesive with everything that already existed in the project, which I'll say is like a position that many game writers will just find themselves in. And I think probably from anywhere from entry to even mid-level, I can't imagine seniors doing this sort of work, but I think it's very common. Writers are just brought in late, and often have to add the context and the why, which is just part of the job. And for me, it was a very big undertaking because I didn't have the luxury of simply just focusing on the dialogue. There were so many other things I needed to focus on, and so I knew I was going to have to like lean on some sort of resources that I'd learned to help solve the issue of meaningful choices in dialogue. And so someone I looked to whose work I admired and still admire is John Ingold, who's the director at Inkle Studios. I love his work. I love everything that Inkle puts out. And I think I learned from, I can't name it now or cite it, but I learned from a talk that he gave that he's not a big fan of Disco Elysium's dialogue system because there's too many choices, which, may be an unpopular take, but it's also one that I tend to agree with. Jesse Schell says in his book that in some situations, the player just wants a small number of meaningful choices, and not to be overwhelmed with so many choices. Probably, I'm not speaking for John Ingold, but I felt that way playing Disco a lot of the times. My first attempt at playing Disco Elysium, I would nod off sometimes during conversations because I don't know, maybe I was just playing it wrong. Like I was trying to do the thing where you exhaust all the dialogue, but in my second and third go, I was like, okay, let me get better about like the role playing aspect of it. Like if the Harry I'm playing right now would not exhaust all the dialogue, he'd probably want to hear like one or two things and then walk away. So, and I think that's obviously the point, but like still, couldn't get past the feeling of feeling overwhelmed and just kind of having to force myself to break that habit because I am that player. I love to exhaust dialogue, but it just was not working for me in Disco. John Ingold believes, well, I like the way he sets it up. He says, what is the correct number of dialogue options in a conversation and why is it 3? So he's got very strong feelings about this. And I don't know if I believe wholeheartedly in that approach, but again, for me, it was like a shortcut. It was like, okay, this is someone who feels very strongly about this. He's bringing the receipts. Here's why. So this is something I can employ, as like a shortcut for hopefully to make choices in Arto feel meaningful. So John's approach is that he has dialogue options, 3 dialogue options, and they usually fall under the accept, the reject, and the deflect options. And the accept options for dialogue are often like the gentle, kind of low stakes, low conflict options for players who kind of just want to play nice. I think this is interesting. It's like profiling players that fit these kind of options. The reject option is kind of the destructive, sarcastic, chaotic options for players who just kind of want to be snarky towards NPCs. And then the deflect options are just kind of the unpredictable, goofy options for players who are interested in testing the bounds of what can be said to an NPC. Mm-hmm. And also importantly, the deflect options will usually be where like trapdoor opportunities could be. So for the players who just want to get out of dialogues as fast as you can, if you're able to identify which option is which, of the 3, there's one option that'll get you through this conversation faster than the other 2. Right. There's a rule for the dialogue system in Arto. I laid out, core values that included agency, meaning dialogue choices should reflect a range of approaches a player can take in any conversation. Kind of just becomes like a space for the player to be able to kind of mini role play, like who you as Liv, who is our player character, who is Liv. How is she feeling in this moment? Is she feeling a little snarky? Is she feeling, just kind of give the onus in the player to kind of have fun in that moment. Mm-hmm. Anytime a dialogue choice comes up. So agency, responsiveness, meaning, dialogue choices should be responded to by the NPC. So you're not just clicking a choice and then, whatever you're saying, whatever your character is saying is not going to be acknowledged. It's going to be acknowledged, and then we're going to move on. So again, a little I feel like goes a long way in making things feel meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
And then momentum, meaning, we're going to, like I said, include some sort of built-in feature for players who just want to zoom through the game, that trapdoor that I mentioned. But yeah, so like once I landed on that, every single conversation that had choices in Arto, which is just about all of them, that was the framing. It was like, okay, what's the accept, what's the reject, what's the deflect? And that informed a lot of the writing as far as the dialogue for that project.
Very cool. Thanks for that. I would love to dig into a skill tree someday, because that's a fun one too. But we got to keep moving. Yeah, another time. Well, let's move on to the next lens, or we're going to run out of time here.
Yeah.
The lens of characters. So first of all, just to establish, this is in reference to the character of the game, not characters in the game. So with that said, how do you approach the lens of character in your narrative work?
Yeah, this is a great question, and also one I kind of just sat with for a while, because I don't know that I have enough experience kind of using this lens in my own professional work. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons I wanted to choose this lens and discuss it with you is because I just wanted to touch on that idea that not all bugs in games are bad, and that some can really add to the overall character of a game. Mm-hmm. And you've probably heard this, but an example that I've shared with Susan I shared her this anecdote of myself playing Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion and just being like all in on that in that game. I think I made my optimal character. I was really feeling it. I played some of the downloadable content. It was just like trucking my way through it. But then I encountered like this horse that was just, for whatever reason, city guards were attacking it, bears were attacking it, dogs were attacking it, fish from the water were trying to attack it. I don't know why everyone wanted this horse dead. And to me, it was clearly a bug. There's no way that this was any, on the intention or the, I don't think any designer intended for this behavior, but for some reason, the world wanted to kill this horse. And so my like purpose shifted in that moment. I no longer cared about making any progress in this game or beating the game or forget the story. Like, I just want to protect this horse. And I don't know, it was such anytime I think of Oblivion, I never beat the game, but anytime I think of Oblivion, I think of that horse. And how cool is that? It was like a crazy emergent thing that happened because of a bug. It has to be a bug.
Yeah, guaranteed.
So yeah, I don't know. I think in the future, the way I would approach this lens in my own work is to be mindful of that. Not every idea that I help create, or not every feature that I have a hand in creating needs to be perfect. I feel like there should be space for imperfections, because again, I feel like there's this sort of beautiful space that exists between whenever a player encounters a bug. So that's the beginning of the space, and then either the time they decide to leave it, or the time where the bug just kind of, in games, sometimes bugs just fix themselves. Like a person's face will just like become normal again. Mm-hmm. But in between that moment, there's like a special little limit. There's a special space where players can like feel free to create their own sort of significance, whether it be narrative or gameplay related. So I think, yeah, that would be my takeaway and thinking about, how would I apply this lens to future work. And just as a final thought, I thought I also wanted to bring up the game, when I think about this lens, I think about the game Prince of Persia: Warrior Within, which was a really amazing action game on the PlayStation 2, and I think the GameCube as well. But yeah, this was a game that my brother and our friends just played over and over relentlessly. One, because it's an amazing action game, but two, because there's so many bugs in this game. It's amazing. But to us, it was just like it just added to the imperfect package, and we all loved it. And we were like just finding out different ways, like how to beat this game. Like, I'm going to do it without drinking water from the fountain. Or I'm going to do it with the same, like the base swords or whatever. But you knew whatever way we were trying to beat this game, you were going to, like, the bugs were so reliable. Like, you knew they were coming. They're like old friends. Mm-hmm. But yeah, whenever I think about that game, the memories of it always make me smile because of all those bugs in it.
There's something about that little touch of chaos or imperfection that makes it a little more human, a little more authentic, so you can enjoy the experience.
Exactly.
It's interesting when I talk to Jesse about the book and about the lenses, the concept that some of the lenses can be applied to life in general as opposed to just game design. I think this is one. I think
this is definitely one.
Something about a book where there's something wrong with it, like in the printing or something, that makes it just a little more special, or a photo that you take at Disneyland and there's somebody in the background, giving you the finger or mooning you. It just makes it a little bit more special. Like, it's just different.
Yes, the real life bugs we encounter in our day-to-day. For sure. This is definitely one that can be applied to real life, all aspects of life.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's move along. The next lens we're going to attack today is the lens of feedback. Now, a game's feedback, and we're not talking about the feedback that playtesters or players give you. We're talking about that feedback loop inside the game, the cues the game gives you to tell you if you're doing the right or wrong thing. So, with that said, a game's feedback is crucial for guiding players through their gaming journey. How have you applied this lens in your past work?
Yes, I love talking and thinking about this lens because of how important good feedback is to an overall gaming journey. I think one useful question that Jesse Schell suggests we ask ourselves when applying this lens is, what is the player's goal? And what feedback will help them toward that goal? So here's one example I'll share. When I was brought onto Arto, the studio had compiled a couple of silent review reports that were, essentially compiled data points from games media playtesters at the time. Mm-hmm. And one of the key points that was identified by players who were playing this build, and it was not a full build, it was just like I think a level and some some stuff, but one of the main points was that players did not know why they were doing what they were doing. The context wasn't there. And we talk about in Susan's game writing masterclass about some of the things that designers need from game writers or narrative designers is exactly this. The why, the context for the journey that the players are going on. And so one of Arto's key features is this really, really cool world coloring mechanic. And it's genuinely like a very cool mechanic that the team put a ton of work into for years, to make it look good and to feel good. Arto used to be a sci-fi game before it became sort of like this action adventure game that was about like different art styles, and even then in that early concept, that idea of like world, like as you walk you're coloring in the world, was always there because it was just a cool idea. So I see the team wanted to hang on to that, even though they shifted completely from a sci-fi concept to something else. But again, there was no real context for why the game is set in a world that had been drained of its color, why you, the player, are the one responsible for returning that color. And so adding this sort of narrative context for existing mechanics and levels and key NPCs was a big part of my job when I was brought on. So after being brought on to and spending enough time with the project, I felt like I was finally at a point where I could add that context okay, and do it in a way, again, which is something the team and those silent reviews were asking for. Do it in a way that felt cohesive to everything that was already there. Mm-hmm. So, it's that job where you're brought on late. You are put in a very specific sandbox as a game writer or a narrative designer, and you just kind of have to like play with all the pieces and the parts that exist and add to it in a way that makes it feel cohesive overall. And another thing I was thinking about for if we have time for a second example is I realized this was already, while I was in the thick of it, I realized that the overall win state, like how do you win this game, was not very clear. Arto is sort of a semi-open world game where players are given the chance to hop into different biomes that are completely composed of different art styles. There's like a retro pixelated art style that has like synthwave vibes, and another one that's like solely inspired by vector and cubism art styles. But again, identified that there just wasn't like an overarching goal for the players to be working towards. So again, that feedback was not in place. The context for why players should be going into these different worlds was not there. Mm-hmm. So I gave that a lot of thought, and then eventually like formulated a pitch or an idea of what I thought could be the overall goal, what players could be working toward, how that could be kind of breadcrumb to them in our objective menu and stuff like that. And I presented my pitch to the team, and it was well received. And we just went with that idea. And and I think probably everyone was thinking the same thing. It was like, oh yeah, this is like really important. We don't know what the players are working towards, or we kind of figured out the why, but we still don't know what exactly is the specific thing. So that required more work for me, in kind of doing the final push for like the story and then on the narrative side, and again, still being mindful of what existed and how I could make it work. And thankfully, it was well received.
Very cool, dude. In your opinion, how does the feedback loop, like, how does it affect the emotional state of the player, and what does a designer have to consider when it comes to what that feedback loop can do to the emotions of the person playing?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting how, from a design standpoint, we can instill these different sort of emotional states within players by creating these effective feedback loops. This specific question made me think about our decision to include optional, very, very difficult boss fights in Arto's sort of main overworld. It's like the main world where there's not other than these boss fights, there's no combat. You just like talking to NPCs, and then you go into one of the worlds, and then that the loop of the actual loop begins when you go into one of those worlds. Mm-hmm. But we decided as part of like a side quest that I designed, we were just gonna add like some additional, an additional part to the game, for those hardcore people who just like a good challenge. But the positioning of the NPC quest giver for this quest, as well as the optional, like the arena where the first optional boss is very close to the point where you first arrive to the overworld. So you're just like this little baby, with like no abilities, there's nothing. And I loved watching a lot. I watched a lot of people, small time streamers, stream this game when it came out, and I absolutely loved watching these streamers walk into this boss arena and just get demolished by this huge frog boss that our amazing designer Austin Walker came up with. This one. I would hop into Twitch and just be like, hey, like Arto dev here, like I never wanted to tell them like, oh, maybe you shouldn't be here, but I was just watching, mm-hmm. and watching this one streamer, and he was like, man, whoever designed this boss needs to get put in an insane asylum or something like that. And I relayed that to Austin, and he was very happy. But again, we purposely designed these very difficult boss fights with the intention of delivering a feedback loop that is like, oh, this is too hard. Maybe I should come back after I've upgraded my character a little bit. I feel like that message was clear, but still there are those kinds of people that are just like, I'm gonna beat this guy, even though it's possible. And I think I did watch one or two streamers beat it, but it's hard, and it's a hard fight if you don't know the fight inside and out. It's going to take you some time. But again, it's like that Elden Ring thing of like lots of hard stuff over here. Let me go over here and find some other stuff. So that was trying to instill that emotional state of, I'm not ready for this, I should go elsewhere. But not everyone listens to that feeling.
You're trying to put some fear into the player.
Yeah, really, it didn't work always.
I was thinking Elden Ring too, because I'm the guy who played Elden Ring. I came out of the cave, ran into the knight on the horse, died.
Right to the sentinel.
I was like, I'm done. I'll try again in a year. Yeah, I got 2 other games.
I thought you were gonna say you just like treated him as like the first boss and had to.
Oh, I tried, and he just put me down. So
yeah, it's ridiculous.
I'll pick it back up eventually. It's all cut.
Yeah, you got time. You shadow the Erd trees coming out.
Oh, I'm running out of time.
You are.
Okay, next lens on the list. We're almost there. This one, I let you have some input, and you picked this one, so I am really curious to see why. So the lens of documentation. So first of all, feel free to introduce us to what this lens is. But then on top of that, I mean, documentation is not something that's sexy. It doesn't get the spotlight very often, but it is kind of essential. So take me through, why is it important? How do you ensure documentation practices align with your storytelling goals? Just kind of walk me through your process.
Absolutely. I think I chose this because I don't have a ton of experience that I can pull from. And in the experience that I do have, documentation was a big part of my job. And so I saw it and I was like, oh, this one for sure, I can speak to this. And I think a lot of people could probably speak to it, but really it boils down to the fact that documentation is an essential task that many on a dev team, will eventually be required to do, regardless of your discipline. There's the infamous GDD, game design document, which I don't know, maybe a creative director, drafts up and then kind of everyone throws stuff into.
Mm-hmm.
But again, Jesse Schell, in his book, quotes another designer, Jason Vandenberg, saying that GDDs are literally out of date the moment you write them because these are documents that are an expression of your current theories of what you think will make the game good. But again, until you see those theories in practice, you cannot know. So GDD, it's got its importance, but it's also got its things to weigh you down. But I've seen documentations on our team in Arto, specifically from our level designers, who write a quick little thing that outlines a level's flow. I've seen documentation from our programmers that just like these huge tables of just detailing the different classifications of enemies in the game. And then of course, I personally have created extensive documentation, some on dialogue systems, some on quest systems, some on story, some on characters, some on lore, general world building.
Mm-hmm.
So I've done that a lot. I go through my Google Drive folder or my Google Docs, and I'm just like, Arto this, Arto. There's a lot that I made.
Mm-hmm.
So I think to answer your question directly, I would say that because a video game is an experience that is being designed collaboratively, the way one ensures documentation practices align with storytelling goals is to make sure that everyone on the team knows the same information.
Nice.
And so what that basically boils down to is communication. And in Jesse Schell's book, he says game documents have exactly two purposes: memory and communication. So just as an example, if I'm working on a document and, say about the original paint arrow system in Arto, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
and I was deliberately not made privy to discussions between our creative director and programmers about plans to introduce this huge overhaul system. Well, then the document that I'm working on was literally useless because I'm writing about an older iteration that is not going to be in the game. So I've just wasted time focusing on something that has kind of been evolving into something new without being looped into that conversation. So communication is important in any team, whether you're in person, remote, hybrid. Information needs to be shared regularly with everyone. Otherwise, things start falling through the cracks. Then useless work starts being done. People's time starts getting wasted. And ultimately, all of that can lead to issues with a team's overarching storytelling goals with their project.
Just to riff off this, just because I'm curious, do you think that the actual format nature of a documentation process, can it actually impact the narrative that comes out of it? And the answer could be no. I'm curious, like, could you build a document that intentionally or unintentionally biases the resulting work in a direction?
I think so. I think the way to do this is to not write a document with a ton of words, and instead do something like Miro. We get a board together, or like Milanote, put a bunch of boards, because so many people on dev teams are such visual learners. So like, I understand no one wants to sit and read a 5-page document that I've just written about like the lore of an ant. I get it. But let me put some pictures together for you on a Milanote board that I feel like would better drive certain points home and get the attention of more of the visual learners and corral them to my side to again like become champions for that idea. Because I get it. I no one's got time to sit down and read a bunch of documentation. So I think method can have an impact for sure.
Cool. There's a lot of power in mood boards and storyboards. We use them in marketing and content creation and all kinds of other fields. So they're powerful. Yeah. They're useful.
Yeah. Flow charts, even just a good flow chart.
There you go. Yeah. Somebody once said, I swear it was you, that it requires the quality of the questions is what informs the quality of the documentation. You got to ask the right questions to get good documentation. Can you share some thoughts on that, or examples, or input ideas?
Yeah, I think this was something I wrote up to you in my another one of the reasons that I chose this, because it's like I do feel like in order to create good documentation habits for yourself and probably for most of the people on the team, you need to be able to ask yourself good questions. Mm-hmm. And so, some questions that I just kind of put a list together. I didn't think too hard about all of them in depth, but I think like asking yourself, okay, is this the thing that I'm about to start writing about or writing a documentation for? Is this still relevant? If so, to who and why? So, I feel like features in a project change all the time. The paint arrow example is a good sample of this. Sometimes systems or features are altered, sometimes they evolve, and sometimes they're completely taken out and swapped with something totally new. So this is something that's very important to everyone on the team. So asking yourself, all right, before I sit down and write this thing, is this relevant? If so, to who and why? Mm-hmm. And then if you can answer all those questions, then go ahead and write yourself a document or put your mood board or flow chart together, and it will not be time wasted. And then share it with everyone. Well, that goes for all of these, share everything with everyone. I think asking yourself, does X person know about this? And then just fill in X with a different member on your team. Like, again, I'm going to write a document about, I don't know, I feel like the origin of a player character or something like that, or something to do with their culture or their background. Who needs to know about this? Probably everyone on the team. Just to be kept in the loop.
Right.
Oh, I thought we were doing a game about an alien from Uranus, not a human on, living on Mars or whatever. So let's just make sure everyone knows. Again, not so that they can be given the document and expected to read it and pour through every detail. Again, just so that everyone's in the loop. I think asking yourself, is this a story document or is this a lore document? As a writer or a narrative designer could be a helpful indicator of whether or not you need to do it. I feel like in general, spending time, extensive time, like writing a story document, especially in pre-production, even in production, it can be tricky because things change all the time with gameplay, new gameplay elements being introduced. How's that going to change the story? You could have a living document. I think it might be more helpful to have a living lore document, as far as because that's so much of your story is going to be pulled from lore that's created, and I think it's just probably time better well spent focusing on a lore document than a story document, because that's going to change all the time. I think asking yourself, does this NPC or does this character still exist in the game too? I'm not going to sit down and write a short character sketch for a boss character that has been cut. So ask yourself, do they exist? Ask the relevant people that would know before you commit to that, because otherwise it's time wasted. Has anything about our core mechanics changed? Again, if I was sitting down writing about, okay, this is the context for the world coloring mechanic, and I write I do the work and add the context to that, and then only to find out that key feature of the game has been cut. Time wasted. So yeah, I have one or two more of these, but again, it's just like asking yourself those questions, and not just yourself, thinking about the others on the team. What's the win state of the game? Has it changed for any reason? What emotions are we trying to instill in the players throughout this experience? Oh, I thought we were writing a horror game. Why is there slapstick comedy in this thing? So yeah, that's what I mean about, I feel like asking yourself good questions can inform good documentation habits.
Yeah, for sure. Is that a checklist and a process that you use? Is that
this is something I've just kind of whipped up on the fly, but again, based on experience. I would like for it to become like a checklist. I think a checklist is always helpful. But yeah, I think eventually having some sort of like tried and true checklist of things before anyone sits down to do any sort of documentation could be hugely beneficial, and just in general create a good pipeline.
Cool. We're running low on time, but I have one more question about the lens of documentation I'm kind of curious of your opinion on. I have talked to a lot of lore masters, lore keepers, writers at big studios, and some of them have talked about using wikis, large in-house wikis and sometimes external wikis to maintain their lore. I'm just curious what your opinion is on the use of wikis as documentation.
I love that idea. It's because one of the reasons I love it is because it's a different presentation, like what you and I were talking about. It's not just a boring Google Doc. It is right. It is something that it's like a more fun version of a living document. I'm a fan of wikis for sure. And then you have all the shortcuts to them. I feel like at this point everyone knows what a wiki looks like, what it contains. Yeah, that's great. I think it's a really good idea, and something I would, if I worked on a big project that was required to keep track of really deep, extensive lore, I could see myself getting into that for sure.
Nice. That's what I figured. I was just curious. Okay, well, that is the end of the lenses, but there's another question I like to ask everybody who comes on the show. So it is your turn, my friend. There's this question that lives at the core of my show, and that is that I personally believe there's a magic space in the center for stories and games, obviously, but also performance arts, music, musicians, songwriters, playwrights, scriptwriters, everybody. All of us creative types can just hang out and get along and hold hands. If you agree with me, in your opinion, what is the magic thread that holds all that together?
I do. I love this question. I love the fact that you ask it to all your guests. I haven't listened to everyone's responses. Again, I have been working my way through the back catalog of your show and listening to some of the more recent ones. So heard some answers, and so I'd be interested to hear from you if someone has touched on this. I'm sure they have. It's nothing groundbreaking, but for me, giving this thought, I think it really boils down to connection. I think games, fiction, all other forms of entertainment can offer beautiful shortcuts in connecting with others. I feel like if I'm ever meeting new people, it is always a little bit nerve-wracking. What am I going to talk about? What are we going to say? And this is coming from someone who genuinely enjoys meeting other people and connecting and networking. I've always loved that. But regardless, the nerves are always there. That little bit of nerves or butterflies in the stomach. But I feel like the moment I learn that someone I'm meeting for the first time has either played a game or read a novel or seen a movie or read a screenplay or played a board game that I love, it's like that Step Brothers moment. It's like, did we just become best friends?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know this person, but that moment is there. And so I feel like all of these wonderful pieces of media continue to allow us to make meaningful connections with the people around us and build those bridges.
I love it. That is a fantastic answer, my friend.
Is it the same exact thing that like two guests from two shows ago said?
I have never heard the same answer twice. I don't think you can. But that being said, everyone's answer, when you dig right into it, we're all saying the same thing. So that's the question. It's at first glance seems like it's a philosophical question about stories and games. Really, the question is about what does Philip find at the center of story and game? So there's no way somebody else could have the same answer.
I love that. That's why it's such a good question. Such a good, everything about this. I love the show.
Thanks, buddy.
It's great. I love it.
Well, we're going to wrap up soon here, but before we go, I want to do a quick fire round. Let's do the quick fire. I think
there we go.
Listen, you know the quick fire, so let's just do it. What are you playing right now?
I am getting I'm getting through Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I'm going to play Unicorn Overlord next.
Nice. What are you currently reading?
I usually do audiobooks because that's
still reading.
How I operate now. My wife and I are we've been going through all of the Sarah J. Maasverse. So we're on the Crescent City novels right now, on the second book of that. And we've read everything already before that. So we're almost like up to date because that third book just came out, I think in January.
We'll have a conversation about that another time off the pod.
Sweet. Okay, good.
What's the best advice you've ever received? And this could be career advice, life advice, whatever you got.
Yeah, this is going to be funny. I think it's basically manifesting. But this before I heard of it referred to as such. I was in undergrad. So, this was like 2009. And a professor of mine told me that she was talking to me. I should make a habit of throwing things out there into the ether or the universe because somehow they find a way of coming back. Mm-hmm. And again, that's just manifesting, right? But they didn't have a name for it back then, I guess. But I listed that because there are plenty of examples that I could point to in my own life where I have done that and things have come back in really unexpected ways. So yeah, amazing.
Very cool. Yeah. I'm a big fan of manifesting as well. I did read The Secret back in the day and it was mostly garbage, but that one piece there, at least I learned that.
The one piece of
the rest
treasure.
Yeah. All right, here we go. Last one.
Yep.
If you could host a game session with any four people, living or dead, from any time or any period in time, yeah, that's it. Who would they be, and what would you play?
All right. I hope this answer is not super lame. I don't have a ton of tabletop experience. No TTRPG experience to speak of, but obviously I've played board games. And I think it would be fun to get a crew together to play the Game of Thrones board game, which is a game I've played ad nauseum and had nearly broken lifelong friendships over. But I think it would be fun to get a crew of like just hardcore like general strategists and play that game with. So I'm talking like Hannibal, the Carthaginian general that the elephant, Denzel Washington is going to play him very soon. The elephants over the Alps, Sun Tzu, I think Artemisia, who became a ruthless strategist and fought for Xerxes I in the Persian invasion of Greece.
Mm-hmm.
And then Zenobia, who was a warrior queen who conquered Egypt from the Romans. I think let's get these crew together. Language obviously is not a barrier, and let's just play Game of Thrones and see how bad that they demolish me at strategy. I think that would be cool.
Yeah, right up until somebody pulls a knife.
Oh yeah, no. So no one's leaving that table alive, but it would be interesting.
That would be a great game. And that is a great. I'm looking around here. It's here somewhere, I'm sure. But
it's
yeah,
up
that's
here somewhere. We put it way up there where no one can reach it because it breaks, friendships.
Smart. I got Scythe and Twilight Imperium on the same shelf up there, so I get it.
Yeah, don't touch them.
Yeah. All right, that's it. We're gonna walk out the door. We're gonna turn down the fire, put up the chairs. But before we wander out the door, I would love to give you the last word. So first of all, if there's something you want to boost, promote, talk about, go ahead. And then before we head out the door, give me a closing word of wisdom.
Great. So Arto was shipped last May. It's on Steam. We tried to our detriment to get it out and ported to Switch. Unfortunately, just didn't work out. But it's on Steam. It's there. It's great. It's fun. It's short. If you like to just hack and slash, just hit a bunch of things, it's there. And it's I'm proud of it. And as far as last words, I just think, in sort of that vein of the advice that my professor gave me, I think if you want to do something, just do it, no matter what it is. Throw it out there in the universe, and it's gonna find a way to come back, and not always in ways that you expect. So go for it.
Well, folks, if you're as tired as I am, it's time to shut up shop and head to bed. First of all, thank you again to Philip Balli for sitting down and sharing your insight and wisdom into the lenses of meaningful choices, character development, feedback mechanisms, and even documentation practices. You've offered us valuable insights into the craft of narrative design in gaming. And to you, dear listener, thank you again for taking the seat at the table and joining in. Until we meet again, remember to keep exploring, creating, and sharing those stories. Stay safe, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in the corner of Story and Game.